Come on. Yo, this that spooky shit, that real, that's right, that GM Sonic shit, Hey yo, Mr. Clean, shout out to Dracula Presley, Corby, Johnny Slash on the beat, hey yo. Yo, it's the GM Sonic Show, Phantom Opera flow, permissionless, immutable, unstoppable, spectacular, gather with Corville and Dracula, abracadabra, flip shit like a spatula, few Andre Stan, the master of memes, DeFi king, half man, half virtual machine, no other team can match the collective expertise, no other chain can achieve the supersonic speeds, home with the most creative tech, what's your favorite decks, spooky swap, equalizer, Beethoven X. And when I place my bet, I never break a sweat. Worship the open source code like sacred text. Rest assured, battle tested and ready for war. I check the bribes, cast the vote and collect the rewards. Knock at the door, trick or treat. Move like a zombie, but usually I stay cooler than Fonzie. I get surgical with this, call me Dr. Doom. Break the sound barrier, hit you with a sonic boom. We got it wrapped like a mummy in a tomb. It's about time we address the elephant in the room. It's called Sonic. Yo, what's the new hot topic? GM Sonic. Straight up alpha, you can get it if you watch it. GM Sonic. Yo, what's the new hot topic? GM Sonic. Straight up alpha, you can get it if you watch it. Yo, since the Genesis block, consensus didn't stop. Innovating since day one and never missed the plot. I'm just a humble yield farmer, tending these crops like a routine. See you at the next epoch. Ayo, the DeFi Renaissance, yeah, we were part of that. Your favorite dap, Phantom is where it started at. Go to Paint Swap and cop an ancient artifact. Let's run it back so we can 20x the market cap. FGM's the pre-sale, S is the ticker. It's best to zoom out so you can see the bigger picture. Brand new tech, brand new insignia, no trivia, we stacking more chips than Nvidia. Graduated from Halloween to a Sonic theme. The dead chain resurrected, make you wanna scream. Due diligence, follow the new primitives, controlled by the citizens, built to move billions. Your mass adoption, that's the only option. We ain't stopping till we locked in the top 10. Who got the best community? Who got the most promise? Who got the most pumponomics? Phantom and now Sonic. Yo, what's the new hot topic? GM Sonic. Straight up alpha, you can get it if you watch it. GM Sonic. Yo, what's the new hot topic? GM Sonic. Straight up alpha, you can get it if you watch it.
I'm tired, bros, I'm tired of this world. When will it be my time to be on top? I'm tired, bros, I'm tired of this world. When will it be my time to be on top?
諦めんなよ。諦めんなお前。どうしてそこでやめるんだ。そこで もう少し頑張ってみろよ。ダメ、諦めたら。周りのこと思えよ。応援してる人たちのこと思ってみろって。あともうちょっとのところなんだから。俺だってこのマイナス10度のところ、しじみが取れるって頑張ってんだよ。絶対やってみろ。必ず目標達成できる。だからこそ、ネバーギブアップ。
Hey, Drac here. No Corval. Corval's busy today. He's got real life things going on, and kind of envious of him, really. Imagine that you just slept in today and you went downstairs and you Uber Eats the giant breakfast sandwich and you just turned on Netflix and you never heard of Bitcoin or crypto or anything. And you're just looking at your phone thinking, what am I going to do tonight? It's Friday. Can you imagine it? I can imagine it a little bit. But yeah, Zorg's right here. I felt like there couldn't be any Kirk today. Just couldn't be any. Could not have Hosanna today. Just another violent move down overnight. I think Eastern time, I think this all went down like around 2-3 a.m. I woke up seeing that $1 billion had been liquidated from the market. I think it's Watcher Guru. It's one of the Telegram channels where it just constantly tells you like when there's just been like an insane liquidation event. So Fallout Zone says, well, if you were only in BTC, you probably wouldn't feel too bad. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more tolerable looking at your Bitcoin if you have Bitcoin, compared to alts or even Ethereum right now. I guess a little bit of hopium on the Bitcoin chart is like, as I've kind of said here, this has been kind of like the pattern I've been watching. Tapping the baseline here on the Ichi weekly. Typically taps it, another leg up, taps it, leg up. So the question is this going to happen a third time? Right now, it looks okay, right? I mean, we did wick into the cloud. Like I said, Ichi on the weekly is like for Bitcoin is pretty powerful. It's always been a good compass in terms of just like general market direction for me. And yeah, I feel like if we have a closing in the cloud, we're going to have like what's called an edge to edge. And that would not be very nice right now to enter the cloud, do a full edge to edge. We'd be looking at, I don't know, 70K, something like that. Yeah. Yankee says, when will people stop using leverage? Honestly, we were talking about this. It might have been in GM Sonic Telegram where, as we've talked about on the show before, 2019, 2020, everybody said, wait for the institution money. The institution money's coming. It's going to change everything. They're going to buy our bags. But what you're also encountering now with things like leverage being more popular than ever, it's very easy to make some like violent moves and quick. And if you don't think that there's institutional people that understand that they can manipulate this market much easier than the stock market. I'm not saying that every time there's a dip or something, there's a conspiracy, because there's a lot of things at play, obviously. I mean, I think we're still seeing aftermath from 1010. But yeah, I mean, the leverage has, actually Benny's got a good comment here where it's just kind of like, the leverage is necessary. You have to balance risk, but the issue is retail is just using it to gamble. And I agree with that in crypto. When you have those first, I remember like during BitMEX, when it was like all there really was to do was buy some random ERC20s or, gamble on BitMEX. Some of those first times you get exposed to 100x leverage, get liquidated like instantly. But when you have a win on it, it's hard to replicate that feeling, So yeah, I mean, I've said it before that I started mostly as like a trader and like a leverage trader and blew a lot of accounts, did all that stuff. Nowadays, at least in crypto, I tend to look at leverage as like money in the casino. You're not going back. Like if you win, that's great. If you lose, you can stomach it. Because I hate seeing in times like this, people just kind of like, they've lost like a significant amount of their portfolio due to the swings, and they get it in their head that they're going to revenge trade and dig themselves out of the hole. And that's exactly how they get you. You know what I mean? Yeah, SMU says, here's help is available. Here's the gambling helpline, 1-800-GAMBLER. Don't know if that's the real phone number, but oh man. But yeah, I mean, if you're gonna call it a thesis, I guess my thesis or thesis, as some people would like to say, I'm still pretty much inclined to believe that we're gonna bounce from here. There are people that are already saying it's over. I don't think it's over. I think that we are just having, in the course of looking at the charts and high time frames, if 6 months from now, if you looked at this chart, I don't know if anyone would really think anything of it. I mean, we were just moving so far without any correction. I mean, look at this. I mean, April, yeah, end of March, early April, it's been basically up only on Bitcoin. 1010, I think, put us in a position where I kind of believe we would actually maybe not even come all the way to the baseline if we hadn't had 1010. We'd maybe be looking at upper 90s, mid 90s, or something like that. Don't worry, Billy. We're gonna get to the Sonic chart. Don't worry. But I don't know. There's been numbers, like in terms of like 1010 where they've said, hey, I think it was 40 times more money liquidated than FTX. And if you remember, FTX bodies were coming up for a long time, months, because you have those guys that like instantly just wiped, disintegrated, evaporated. You have those guys. Then you have the guys like, you look at something like XUSD. You got the guys that it takes maybe a week, 2 weeks. They got a hold. They're thinking maybe there's a way we can salvage it or fix it. I think, my theory of XUSD, I don't know the team, right? But my theory is probably something like after 1010, they probably had a reasonable hole they could have worked with, right? Like they probably, maybe it was like 4 or 5 million. And it's like, okay, because to me, that would make sense as to why somebody didn't said, all right, the liquidation event happened. We're going back up. So let's just get a little degen on some options and see if we can just, cover the hole and, fix everything. So you got guys that instantly get evaporated. You got guys that it takes a couple weeks. Then you got guys that, like after FTX, you saw people 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2-3 months where they were able to, maybe get like a bridge loan from investors or whatever, but ultimately they still collapse. So I think we're just, we're looking at like a lot of different things that have put us in the situation we are right now. I was going to pull up Ethereum, but if you're looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum is about as ugly, but I think that it's very bottomed. We tapped kind of like a liquidity zone here. Obviously everybody wants to call the bottom. I would be, remiss to be like, okay, this is it. Like everybody flip. But I would say there's a lot of things in terms of just looking at, the charts. I feel like we should be bottom-ish, right? I would hope so, but doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to go, considering that there's just some fun macro thing all the time. S chart, if you want any shred of hopium. S chart also, if you're just looking at purely what's on the screen, it looks bottomed. We kind of had a topple there, 1010, a couple green candles, staircase down. Yeah, Yankee says it is either the bottom or the end of times. I do have to say I tend to agree with that. Like I said, if you're looking at, what I've used to determine what I feel is like the market direction, there's a good chance we're bottomed, but we are definitely on the we're on the razor's edge of we're bottoming or we are flipping bearish. So Betty says sellers exhausted but powered by radical Islam. Yeah, I mean, going back to the Sonic chart here. Yeah, and then it's kind of unprecedented because obviously Sonic being just now almost a year old, we don't really have historical data to compare any of this to yet. I know early on people would say, hey, we have the Phantom chart. You can use the Phantom chart like the Sonic chart. And I was always hesitant to do that for historical reference. And I feel like now more than ever, I wouldn't want to compare it using the Phantom chart. Also, maybe somebody can sound off here. I mean, besides Phantom launch, I think even in peak bear, Phantom only tapped somewhere in the teens. I think 16, 17 cents or something. Yeah, that's also another good point. I can't use the Phantom chart. It's gone from everywhere. Fallout Zone says, we'll get a bounce eventually, but who knows if it will be the last gasp of the bull or new all-time high. I'm leaning towards the former at this point. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm still inclined to think we're going to bounce. There's, we're like in a survival situation because there are a lot of macro things that should be shaping up to benefit the markets and assets, but we're still looking at months away from that, right? So there is the potential for like a lot of pain while we wait for that, right? Something that I was thinking of was like Kobayashi letter, which, talk about a lot on here, but they've been kind of making an observation lately that it's in crypto, I've talked about this before, like in some telegrams or whatever, where I feel like where we're at in crypto is like you have to balance. In some ways, it could be harder than, if you built a strong fundamental company and you have stock and everything, because you have to balance things going on with like the economy, the actual like crypto market, but there's like this attention factor. And when you miss your window on the attention factor in crypto, it's really hard to get it back. It's tooth and nail. You have to really crawl because there's constantly a new shiny thing. There's constantly a new chain, constantly the possibility of a new ecosystem, new meme tokens, whatever. There's just constant churn in terms of attention. And Kobayashi letters kind of been like just talking about some of these crazy swings where, the S&P itself is almost behaving like a shitcoin. And that's kind of like what they're getting at, is that we're sort of seeing almost like this like social attention layer affect the stock market that's like different than it ever has been before. They attribute the initial crash to people like feeling like the AI bubble's finally bursting, a lot of people cashing out. But what they're saying here is that based on like sentiment swing, it's kind of like people like knee jerk, like AI's over, AI's ending. And then it's like it flips back to, well, maybe it's not over. So now we're going to buy again. And it's just kind of unusual. You know what I mean? Like they should just put the SP 500 on like Pump Fund or something. So I think that, they're talking about how like there's been a swing since this morning. And this is like the 4-hour heat map. So this is kind of another reason that makes me think, all right, like this would be a good spot to bounce. The question is, do they let it bounce, right? Or do they want us to go lower? Or is that the sentiment? Let's see here. Yankee says, the most important thing to me is that even during the worst of the bear, FTM always stayed around rank 50 to 60 compared to now where Sonic is looking like it's about to head out of the top 200. Yeah, I mean, that's something to think about in terms of, like I said, the attention and everything else. I think we actually talked about this some last episode where it's just kind of like, there's like, where do you go in terms of like, if Sonic is going to stay like focused on DeFi, then we got to roll out incentives. We got to get some, like a few new projects, like something to get a little hype. I think Flying Tulip can kind of cover part of that, but I think there's still just kind of like an identity, the identity of where it's going forward, I think is going to have to be figured out, and hopefully rapidly. So yeah, and I mean, SMU says there's L1 fatigue. There's no need for this many EVMs. Gas tokens won't make you rich. Protocols are the money makers. And yeah, I mean, I agree with that. That even looking at something like Hyperliquid, like yes, they have their own, they have their own EVM, but before they had their EVM, it was basically an Arbitrum app. And it was like a joke. It was like, yeah, like Arbitrum's role now is just being the hyperliquid bridge. And I agree with that, that I think that we are entering like, or like, like I just mentioned Pump, like you look at Pump Fund, hyperliquid, whatever. It's almost like we are entering like more like an era of it's about the DApp itself, right? And that's who's making the money. You know, it's yet to be seen. Yeah, I mean, I think VCs at this point have to be getting tired of, they had a really good playbook with new infrastructure. I feel like the last bear market, everything was just about upcoming infrastructure, which even at that point, I felt like we already had way too much of it. I guess now we're looking like what, 2-3 years ago, it was already just like, there's kind of enough chains. But it was easy, you could spin up an L2 relatively quick. It can be expensive to run an L2, but that usually coincides with you bringing in money as well. So they kind of ran this playbook over and over and over. And yeah, we definitely are at a point where it's certainly more like fatigue at this point. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of the comments here. Yeah, I actually did think this was funny as well. I heard this little blurb about Sam Altman. They're talking about how much money they have to spend, and how much resources have to get put forward to achieve AGI. And he's kind of like, yeah, once we get there, we'll like figure out how to make money off it. And I think that's the big issue with the AI bubble is there's like, you've kind of had like the hype phase of it, but now people are realizing, okay, like to do this on like a certain scale, it actually costs a lot of money and a lot of resources. So where does the profit, where does the profit come into all this? I mean, not kind of like L1 fatigue. It's like you can only have so many AI agent logins with your Gmail account. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, see, I'm just looking at some more here. Billy says overall crypto market cap is fully round trip the last cycle top. Yeah, I think I had that pulled up, but yeah, I mean, it was basically on the chart. It was like you can just see that we've basically just like settled back to where we were before, kind of like this last run. So Betty says Spotify is still not making any money, and it's been a decade. Yeah, I think that's very much so how AI is being propped up. Elab says, serious question, how will Sonic make money? They'll never make money taking the percent of fees they take. Yeah, and I mean, I think I know like on a fundamental level, they are having to like take a look at things like fee M, because the fees are, a large selling point of the network is how cheap it is to transact. And it's like you're taking so much of the already minimal fees. I think there's other ways that chains can make money. I think that I'm always interested to see chains that like there's a couple new ones. There's a couple things coming out where they kind of have products on like the native chain level. And I think if you had really cheap gas, you could do things like this and just say, hey, like anything that we have that's like a product just goes towards buyback of the token, something like that. I mean, it's why I've said like, the identity going forward is kind of important because, entering this era where everybody's trying to have the highest TPS and the lowest gas possible, people are going to have to think about ways to generate revenue, right? I mean, there's really no way around it. I mean, you can either, if you achieve the kind of volume that say someone like Solana does, I'm sure that you're actually at a point where, you know, you're making money, but how many chains is there like room for to, run that kind of volume daily, right? So I think you have to kind of like, you're going to have to think outside the box, and you're going to have to, maybe you view it as more, like I said, it's more like it's an umbrella, and you have products or, something else. And you just, put everything that you have towards like the main product, which is your token. So yeah, I mean, just kind of like talking about like the overall market, this was like a pretty good article. Just talking about how part of this spiral out is because of this this DAT meta. There are some like treasuries that have already basically totally liquidated their assets. I'm sure there was a time where, it's like, hey, this is looking pretty good. Everything's riding high. But I don't know if this like DAT meta is also just kind of like already gone, already dead. I don't know. I think it's like you're dealing with like people that are in TradFi that are probably not accustomed to, even in their wildest dreams, like the kind of volatility that can come with like one of these bad liquidation days or whatever. And yeah, I mean, this article's talking about how like there's some companies that already like completely liquidated. The combined market cap of all the DATs went from 176 billion to 99 billion. And that's just like over, 5-6 months. So yeah, I mean, the money is flowing out of ETFs. Some of the companies are liquidating in terms of DATs. Yeah, Benny says if the DATs don't end up on indexes, it is over. Yeah, I read like an interesting thing about that, how it's a whole process in terms of like, okay, like the DATs get added to indexes, and then, they can kind of just like by default get some volume and some bids and stuff. And right now, that is part of like where the other shoe may fall in terms of like they're currently kind of going over like nitpicking, like, okay, do these things become like, are they actually like eligible to be in these indexes? And if they're ruled against, in terms of being eligible, it's going to be very bad. So it's almost like it's almost similar to like the tariff thing or something, where it's like, this one decision could like evaporate basically everything that's been like gained from having these like black holes. So Dr. DeFi says, what is not cooked? Man, I don't know today. What has anybody got anything there? What is not cooked today? I mean, like I said, heat map on the 4 hour, you could go scoop up some XRP or something, some BNB. Yeah. Yeah, Sailor's going to be having a rough day if they're not eligible. I've seen that, like, combined with kind of like that going around on a timeline about the DATs, I did see like Sailor wrote kind of like an article today, just trying to like explain, why that's not going to happen, and everybody relax, and, everything's going to be fine. But yeah, I mean, Zorg says too many DATs are scammy, just buying down only alts. Yeah, I mean, pretty early on, there was already kind of like concerns about, I think that legislators felt like there's kind of like too many loopholes that were allowing these companies to just, kind of shift overnight and just be like, hey, we're publicly traded, but now we're, loading up this treasury with SWI or, whatever, Solana, Avalanche. So that was even pretty early on. People just saying like, there's these loopholes that are definitely going to get tied up sooner than later. at the time, I think it was good positioning for Sonic in terms of like they were already having these talks about like, okay, we might have to close some of these loopholes. And once they close them, there probably won't be like any new DATs like in like their like the way they're currently structured. So it would be a good opportunity at the time to be like, oh, well, you know, kind of scoot through the door here before it closes. But you know, we're still waiting on updates on the ETF stuff, the DAT stuff. So, but that's like that's another thing, you know, that there probably has to be, not probably, there has to be some urgency on it. We got to, you know, I think it's like a big job, like cleaning everything up right now. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of, you know, they're working on like new hires, they're working on like kind of restructuring the company. I think that for the amount of like, for what's at hand in terms of the task, right? I think that they need a lot more people, right, to scale this thing. So, because it's like the bunny with the clock meme. So TikTok, you know, like it's got to get this thing moving. So that's really, I don't know. We did have some updates from Mitch, the CEO. I'll start here. He was at the Saudi U.S. Investment Forum in D.C., rubbing elbows with Saudi investors. He had a little video here that, you know, he was taking of Elon talking to somebody, Trump talking to somebody, Johnny Parabolic straight up taking a selfie with him. No, I mean, he goes to this thing right here, and it's, you know, he's in the U.S. Everything's going on right now, like down in Argentina. I think most of the teams down there, Buenos Aires. But good to just see like, hey, like, you know, there is still this institutional angle at play. Maybe we do like get DAT and ETF stuff firmed up sooner than later. Let's see. Dr. DeFi says any of the 4 positions advertised get filled. Not to my knowledge, but I was never, you know, like I stepped down from labs. I guess now we're looking at 2 or 3 weeks ago. And last I had heard, it was like they've been actively interviewing people. I don't think they've got the people like, I don't think they have like the fit yet for the positions, but I know that they have been like actively like working on it. Chud.eth working on top 500 CMC. That'd be brutal. Let's see. Yeah. Chud says nobody's going to apply for those when the token upside is low. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I said last episode. It's complicated because there's an entire flywheel that you have to feed to get this thing running again, you know, like to get the machine running. And I think it's like you're just going to have to like commit strongly to, you know, if you're going to stick to like it being the DeFi chain, you know, you're going to have to just like hit it hard. I mean, cause yeah, like it's there's this whole series of events that won't happen. And it's like, and you have to get the attention back and you have to find a way to get people to come use the chain again. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's not an easy task, but Billy says lots of negativity in here, but thank you for continuing to do this. Yeah, man, me and Corv are always going to be around here doing this. You know, at this point, we're all in it together, right? You know, we got a little community. We got the GM Sonic Telegram. You know, we got the chain. You know, we got protocols, builders. You know, we got a lot of people still here. Some people maybe not by choice, but they're here, right? They're stuck with us. So that's all we can do is, you know, see what's going to happen here. You know, I had plenty of talks with Mitch one-on-one, you know, once he kind of came in, and he is like a really sharp guy and he has a lot of ideas. So I think that obviously it takes time. It's taking more time than I know any of us would like to see, but I think that, he's got kind of an idea of how he wants to slowly kind of like turn this thing around. And some of those things have been implemented, some haven't. We're just gonna, it's almost like, especially with the price right now, and nobody wants to hear this because obviously most of us probably have bags from much higher prices than where it is right now. But I mean, it's almost like at 10 cents or whatever, 11 cents, it is almost like a reboot, right? It's like, I don't know. It's maybe a fresh angle is what it needs, but I'm still of the opinion that I think there's still a lot of DeFi potential. I think that if you just put your foot on the gas and just, went all the way in, there'd be a way to get people back, get builders back, get people excited again. Flying Tulip hits maybe at the right time. There are things that could happen to, like when Phantom had its insane run, it was a relatively short amount of time. And I mean, that's just part of how this industry works. If you can just get if things can come together at the right time and you get the attention back and the flywheel starts rolling again, then, it's anything can go parabolic. So Fallout Zone says time is ticking and we're already in a bad spot. Yeah, I mean, I do think that we are in a situation where the clock is ticking. Dr. DeFi says Sonic can shine as a payment rail. Yeah, and I mean, we talked about this last episode that there have been chains that have kind of leaned in. They leaned in early to being more like, like we can't compete on like a DeFi whatever level. Let's, just really go like the institution angle. And I think last episode I cited Hedera, but the only issue with that is I feel like it takes a lot more time for that to pay off. So I think patience is worn thin a little bit right now. But if they were going to lean into it, they should just be like, boom, like we're leaning into this. This is what we're going after. This is the future. We're going to focus on that. I'm reading some comments here. Yankee says, just need constant green candles to get attention. Proven time and time again. Yeah, I mean, like I said, when Phantom just truly went just like absolutely parabolic, it happened relatively fast. You get a dap or two popping off. The existing eco starts to pop off. All of a sudden, some meme tokens too, whatever. Then you got 6 or 7 projects that are, green candles. People start coming, start buying. That flows to more outlier stuff. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it all just kind of feeds into this flywheel thing. SMU says, need a proper Ponzi. Tomb was well timed. Yeah, I mean, when you look at Tomb, it's just like it was printing and people were making a ton of money off it, sharing the P&Ls, sharing like, hey, I bought T-share at $100 or whatever. I don't know if that could ever be replicated again properly. I mean, truly, like even with Tomb like having a lot of like funding just backing it up and kind of protecting it, even if you did that now, I just don't know if it would ever be the same. But I think it still speaks to, like I said, you look at Hyperliquid, Pump Fund, whatever, like, it still kind of speaks to like you do need like a DApp that's getting some attention and making money and giving green candles and all that stuff. So let's see here. Fallout Zone says the best type of marketing is green. Yeah, I mean, it's that, like I said, I mean, it's just I think that if we lean into DeFi hard and got some incentives, did some other stuff, could get some people back here and get things rolling again. Linnea was a good example. They had this big incentive program, and it did massively pump the TVL, but then it wasn't like sticky. So that's where I also think you kind of have to time it with some new projects, or, you know, several good sources of yield or whatever. So yeah, I mean, the last thing I kind of had to share was this article about this was about the Franzen incident. They have gone back through the lab's infrastructure and renounced any capability to basically like freeze funds like they did with the Beats hack. So honestly, there wasn't like a whole lot here. That was mostly the meat of the article is just saying like, hey, you know, this kind of got maybe dealt with, you know, I don't know if you want to say hasty, but maybe hasty, whatever. But the point being that, you know, they don't want to go through that again. They don't want that to happen again. And they've renounced the things in the infrastructure that would allow that to happen. So you would basically have to hard fork if there was ever an incident like this again. So, you know, validator vote, hard fork, all that stuff. I think it was the right move, you know, because that was kind of hard. You know, we are like entering this time like where, like Elab says here, like nobody wants DeFi anymore. They want a casino. But I think also talking about like decentralization, that's also kind of becoming like an interesting argument, right? Is that, do people like really care about decentralization anymore? And I think that was like a good example of, yes, like maybe it saved some temporary pain from the S price. And, you know, STS maybe like, you know, maybe it wouldn't have maintained a peg or whatever if things had, you know, just totally gotten dumped. But, you know, it's also on the flip side of that, it's kind of like at what cost. So yeah, Dr. Devi says we need 500K S to 50K S for validator self-stake. Yeah, I thought that I think that we're at a point where like obviously the training wheels can come off. I think the validator rate was so high. I can't remember the exact explanation, but it was something about you kind of wanted to like keep it lower with, you know, higher amount of tokens staked and all that stuff, kind of like coming off the ground. But I think obviously the chain runs fine. There's, you know, our metrics have been bleeding out, but the metrics are enough to, you know, you can have a lot of validators. So yeah, I mean, Zorg says cheaper nodes or doesn't mean anything. Yeah, I mean, I think 50,000 was like a good number, honestly. So I think that would be a good move, honestly, to get back to that. But I think this is also why things like VM and like the general fundamentals do have to be looked at, because, you know, I don't really like talk to any validators personally. Maybe somebody else knows this, but I mean, obviously this has to affect being a validator. And maybe that's why there's not so many, is because if you're divvying it up between, you know, 1,000 validators, then I don't know. But yeah, I think it'd be a good move. Yankee says, to be fair, 500,000 S is pretty cheap now. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point, though. I think we should return to that. You know what I mean? Dr. DeFi says, I think S minting should be scrapped as well. Yeah, they should scrap the mint, scrap the ability to freeze, validator votes, governance votes, whatever. So, but yeah, that's pretty much all I got today. Just kind of yapping. I mean, mostly charts, mostly just wanted to check in with everybody. Like I said, I think we still we still are poised for hopefully a bounce here. You know, that's the unfortunate reality is we need Bitcoin to move for us to move, you know, for Ethereum, for alts. So we'll be watching this very closely, of course, because I feel like it determines the direction we are going. But yeah, I mean, I had a post on X, you know, it said survive. It's like I'm not like of the mind of like, okay, it's time to like capitulate and, you know, wait for, I don't know, wait for like the low or whatever. I think we're pretty close there. Last comment here, Mahogany says, what are your thoughts on the Monad ICO not filling? Yeah, I mean, I think it still probably feeds into the fatigue a little bit. You know, Monad's kind of a special case because this has been going on for what, 2 or 3 years now. And it's like people just want the chain to come out. And I mean, they don't have a chain and they have like a big community. So I'm kind of not surprised by it. I feel like they've done enough funding and enough, you know, raising, and, you know, you were buying the ICO at, I want to say 2.5 billion, which, to be fair, in the right market conditions, I think it should be, you know, you might like double your money or something relatively fast, but I still think that the upside's not really, you know, it's an interesting move by Coinbase. It's like, I don't think the upside is really there for people that would, you know, maybe like go really hard on it at this point. But then also, I mean, the average person, I mean, for instance, my dad uses Coinbase, and my dad has some Bitcoin and some Ethereum and, you know, a couple other random things that are on Coinbase, right? Because they got them on unit bias or whatever. The average person though is like, the fuck's Monad? Like, what am I, you know what I mean? I think it's like, it's a good move on their part. I'm sure eventually that'll like bring some excitement and everything else, but I guess you got to start somewhere. But, you know, Monad launches Monday, so we'll monitor that too and talk about that Tuesday, see how everything goes. You know, there's Monad Monday, and then Mega ETH is in like, I think 2 or 3 weeks. So still chains launching regardless of what's happening in the market right now. So that's all I got for today. Thanks for joining me on the solo show where you just listen to me yap endlessly. But thanks for comments and everything else. Corval should be settled by Tuesday, so we'll both be back. And yeah, man, everybody hang in there, stay strong, join the GM Sonic Telegram group. Looking for new quants, you know, we gotta join forces in there and make some money or something. So we will see you Tuesday. Everybody have an excellent weekend.
GM Sonic is Corval and Dracula Presley. GM.